Okay, welcome everyone. A couple of more people have joined us, so we're now ready to start. Good morning to some of you and good afternoon to some of you. Welcome to this webinar organized by Girls Not Brides. This is the first webinar in a series of 2 about project design and fundraising, those webinars are going hand in hand with the project design and fundraising toolkit that Girls Not Brides recently launched. And just to explain some of the logistics to you, the webinar will be recorded, and after the webinar you can find the recording on the Girls Not Brides website and also on our YouTube channel. Throughout the webinar you will be muted, so your microphone does not work. If there's anything, you can always write something in the chat box, for example if you can't hear or if there's any other logistical issue. There will be space for questions at the end of the webinar, so please keep your questions till the end. And when we get to the end, you can type your questions in the question box, which you will see in the dashboard on the right-hand side. And I hope that you'll be able to hear us. There are some helicopters circling around the office today, so you might hear a zoom sometimes. Please accept our apologies for that. So who is this webinar for? Before we start, I want to stress that this webinar is really aimed at those people and organizations who have limited or no experience in project design and are interested to learn more. So we will be covering some of the basic tools that are used in project design, and some of you might be familiar with them already, and it might be a refresher for you, and for some these might be new. And also we talk a lot about child marriage and child marriage related issues. The tools that we will discuss in this webinar are relevant not only for those working specifically on child marriage, but also on related issues around girls or any social issues that you might be working on. So just to run through the outline of what we will cover today. We will have a short session about the toolkits, which will be delivered by my colleague Megan from the partnership team as well. We will talk about some of the basic principles around child marriage programming, and then we'll go into the step-to-step guidance on how to develop your project, which will start with a situation analysis and then going into designing your project logic. Then we'll cover some next steps, and like I said, at the end we'll have time for questions. And the webinar will take about 1 hour, so if at any time you want to leave, feel free to leave, but we'll cover about 1 hour.
Great, thank you. The Design for Success Toolkit was written to support Girls Not Brides members to improve their skills in project design and fundraising. It was developed after consultation with almost 100 Girls Not Brides members from around the world. The toolkit is divided into 2 parts. The first is a step-by-step guide that will take you through the process of how to plan a well-structured project to address child marriage. And the second part gives you top tips on how to turn your project into a strong funding proposal and provides guidance on fundraising. The toolkit is useful for all civil society organizations working to improve the lives of communities, particularly girls and women. The toolkit is for projects addressing child marriage, but is also useful for a wide range of related topics and issues, such as education and health. So how will this toolkit help you? We know that strong project design from the beginning results in great projects. Project relevance is vital to success and to directly meeting the needs of girls and young women that you're working with. The toolkit will help you design your project in a structured way, including how to develop a clear budget and work plan. And once your project is running, you'll be able to monitor and evaluate the impact that you're having and make corrections if needed. We also know that well-structured, clear proposals help with successful fundraising. So the toolkit would help you understand what donors are looking for and how to develop stronger funding proposals. Clear proposals based on strong analysis will help you to increase your credibility amongst potential donors. And through the tips we provide, You will understand how to meet donor requirements and strengthen your relationships with donors. So we're going to have a quick poll, which will pop up on your screen. Are you currently implementing a child marriage project? Please answer yes or no. So if you could answer yes or no, that would be great on your screen. Great, it looks like 70% of you are already implementing child marriage projects. That's really exciting, and so we hope that this webinar will just be a refresher course in going through the steps of project design. So back over to Lara to carry on describing the basic principles.
Thank you, Megan. So, like I said, the webinar will follow the toolkit as we launched it a couple of weeks ago. And at the beginning of the toolkit, sorry, excuse me, I see that you still see the poll, so I'm going to make sure that you see the... Sorry, we just need to go back to the presentation. So the next couple of slides will walk you through some of the basics around child marriage programming. And we'll start with one of the basics that I think most of you know about, which is gender inequality being a root cause for child marriage. So we know that at its heart, child marriage is rooted in the belief that girls and women are inferior to boys and men. Very often in societies where child marriage happens, girls are seen as a burden on their family, and marrying your daughter at a young age can be viewed as a way to ease economic hardship or transfer the burden of looking after a girl to a husband's family. So we know that although child marriage happens to boys as well, it happens to girls a lot more. And we also know that it comes from what we call patriarchal values about how girls should behave, which are often dominant around the world. So these values are ideas about how a girl should dress, who she is allowed to see, who she is allowed to marry, etc. So we know that families closely guard these values and closely guard the honor of their girls in the family. But we also know that gender inequality is not the only root cause for child marriage. There are other causes, including poverty, tradition, and insecurity. And if you want to know more about these, please visit the Girls Not Brides website, where you can find a lot more information about this. So secondly, we also know that addressing child marriage does not require one single strategy, or that there isn't one single solution to end child marriage. We all know that child marriage is a very complex issue. And a couple of years ago, with input from Girls Not Brides members, Girls Not Brides developed what we call our theory of change, which shows 4 major strategies that can be used to end child marriage. And the first one of that theory of change is the strategy of empowering girls, so making sure that girls have the power to make decisions about their own life. But we also know that it's essential that we need to mobilize families and communities, as these people in families and communities often have a lot of influence over girls' lives. But we also know that we need to provide services, for example, education, health, or child protection services, which girls should be able to access to live healthy lives. And then, of course, we know that there need to be strong laws and policies in place that protect the rights of girls and address child marriage in the country. So when we design child marriage projects, we can use a combination of these strategies to achieve change. And if you want to know more about these strategies and about the theory of change, please go to the Girls Not Brides Resource Center or the Girls Not Brides website, where you can find a lot more about them. So a third basic principle of child marriage programming is about engaging girls and young people from the start. So we know that girls and young people are directly affected by child marriage, and therefore it is important that we engage them in the project from the start. We know that engaging girls and youth helps you to address the specific problems that you have identified, and that you will be more likely to achieve change and achieve your desired objectives in the long term. But also when it comes to fundraising, increasing your engagement with girls and youth improves your credibility and reassures donors and other supporters that you are working on important and real issues and that you're directly addressing the needs of girls and young people. So it's essential that you engage girls and youth from the start of your project and that you do this in a meaningful way. So it's not just a box-ticking exercise. And how to do this in a meaningful way. You can find a lot more information about this in the toolkit. We don't have a lot of time to go into that during this webinar, but please visit the toolkit for more guidance on how to engage girls and some of the strategies and measures that you can use.
When working with children and young people, it's important to think about the potential risks they might be facing and how their involvement in your work might impact them. Therefore, most organizations have a do no harm policy or child safeguarding policy. If you don't already have one, the Girls Not Brides Child Safeguarding Policy can help give you ideas for what to include in your own policy. You can also find this on our website. It's also important to remember that most donors will expect organizations working with youth and children to have a child safeguarding policy in place. Okay, ready, set, let's go. We'll now be walking through a step-by-step process of project design. All of these steps and activities can be found in the toolkit. To be able to develop well-designed projects, it's important to follow all of these steps and not to skip any.
So we'll start off with step 1, which is carrying out a situation analysis. So why should you do a situation analysis? A situation analysis will help you to understand what your project needs to try to achieve, which groups you will work with, and what the major challenges are that you might face. So your situation analysis will really help you identify the problems. There are 3 steps to doing a situation analysis. The first one is to collect and analyze data to really understand the situation of child marriage in your country. Secondly, it's important to find out more about who the stakeholders are that are influencing child marriage in your communities. And we do this by carrying out a stakeholder analysis. And then thirdly, we carry out what we call a problem and solution analysis. So this is really identifying the core problem and how you will address this problem. So when you do your situation analysis, it's important to have some questions before you start. So what are the questions that you need to get answers on? For example, what is the scale of child marriage? How often does it really happen? But also which girls or which young people are vulnerable to child marriage and why? And what is driving child marriage in your area? We mentioned some of the root causes, but there might be very specific ones in the project area that you want to work in. And you might also want to understand more about the cultural norms and beliefs regarding marriage to understand what is driving child marriage in your community. And then, of course, it's also important to know what the legal and policy environment is. So the first step is to do data collection and analysis. So this is really to find out more about child marriage in your country, and it's specifically around the statistics of child marriage in your country. And there's a couple of resources that you can use to do this. First of all, there's the UNICEF's State of the World's Children Report, which comes out regularly and has very specific data on how many girls are getting married and what the prevalence of girls getting married is in your country. You can access this on the UNICEF website, or you can also follow the links that are in the toolkit. Then secondly, most countries carry out a demographic health survey. This is a very detailed analysis of many different issues in the country, but child marriage is often one of them. So you can find here statistics about the amount of women getting married and at what age they were getting married. And then of course there's the Girls Not Brides website. If you visit the website, you can find a world map saying where does child marriage happen. You can click on your country and you can find some very detailed information, but also find links to other resources that you can use. And all of these resources that I just mentioned, you can also find in the Girls Not Brides Resource Center, which is on the website. So secondly, in your data collection, it's important to find out what the legal and policy context in your country is. So what does the law say about child marriage and about marriage in general? And what are the rights of girls in your country? So you can find this out by either talking to your own government representatives, by talking to other people in your community, but there's also some websites where you can find for each country what the legal age of marriage is and what the relevant laws and policies are. And you can find the link to the website in the toolkit. And then some countries also developed a national strategy to end child marriage. So it's really important that before you start, you find out if there are any existing policies or strategies like this that your government has already developed and that are addressing child marriage or the girls' issues in general. And then thirdly, it's important to find out more about any regional or international agreements that your government has committed to. For example, there are the Sustainable Development Goals, which include a target specifically on child marriage. And your government has probably ratified those and committed to that target. But there are also regional instruments. So for example, in Southern Africa, the Southern Africa Development Community developed a model law on eradicating child marriage. And it's important that you find out what your government has done to either commit to that or implement that model law. And in South Asia, there is a regional action plan to child marriage. And again, your government might have committed to that and already used that in some of its policies. So it's really important you understand what your government has committed to and how they have acted on these commitments so far.
The next step is to collect information from your project area. This is what we call primary data collection. And there are two ways to do this, either through focus group discussions or one-to-one interviews, which are also called key informant interviews. Before you start, you need to decide what information you need to gather to help you design your project. The toolkit will help give you some useful questions to consider. Focus group discussions bring together a range of different stakeholders in a group, such as community members, parents and grandparents, teachers and girls themselves. These discussions can help you understand perceptions, opinions, beliefs and attitudes that exist in the community. Through focus group discussions, you'll be able to understand some important issues such as which girls are most vulnerable to child marriage and why, the main drivers of child marriage and key stakeholders involved, the main obstacles of addressing child marriage in your community or project area, the effects of child marriage on girls, and understanding the gender dynamics in the community and how these affect child marriage. There is some preparation you need to consider before you carry out a focus group discussion. This includes some of the following steps: preparing a list of questions to discuss with the group, developing strategies to deal with dominant group members or members who are too shy to speak out. You will need to consider child safeguarding requirements and gender dynamics in the group, and always make sure you have a note taker to record the discussions. Key informant interviews are in-depth interviews and discussions with people who have a detailed knowledge of what's occurring in the community. These can be carried out with a range of stakeholders such as community leaders, teachers, religious leaders and service providers. There is some preparation that's required to carry out such a key informant interview. Prepare your questionnaire beforehand with key questions that you want to ask about the main issues you are addressing in your project. Set up meetings with the key informants beforehand, letting them know the purpose of the interview and what they can expect after the interview. Have your questions prepared in advance, but also be flexible and ready to let the conversation flow naturally as you go through the interview with the person. And again, please read the toolkit for a comprehensive list of questions you can ask during your key informant interviews.
So we now go to the second step in your situation analysis. So by doing the data collection from external resources and your focus group discussions and interviews, you have gathered a lot of information on the drivers and scale of child marriage in your country. The second step is to carry out a stakeholder analysis. And this helps you to understand all the different people and groups that your project should work with and how to best incorporate them into your work. So here are some of the key stakeholders that are relevant to child marriage. And I'm sure there might be others specifically in your context, but here are some examples of key stakeholders. For example, girls and their families or other young people in the community, parents and guardians and teachers who have often a lot of influence on girls' lives, but also community groups and service providers who see girls and provide services to girls. And then, of course, there are community and religious leaders who are duty bearers of certain cultural practices or have an influence on the community as well. And then there are more external stakeholders like government agencies or decision makers. This could be ministries or other politicians or other policymakers as well. And of course, the media also is a key stakeholder in the work of around child marriage, as they often shape public opinion or can help you to raise awareness around an issue. So when we carry out a stakeholder analysis, we use a diagram or a table that you can see on your screen now. And this stakeholder analysis table helps you to decide which stakeholders you think the project should engage with and which would have the greatest impact on your project results. So we're now going to demonstrate how to carry out this stakeholder analysis and how to use the diagram. So there are 3 easy steps to complete the analysis. So first of all, what you need to do is list all the stakeholders that are relevant to your project. So when you were doing your data collection and your interviews, you might have already been engaging with a lot of these stakeholders. So in this first step, list all of them. And then the second step is to place each stakeholder into the relevant box of the diagram, and we'll show you how to do that, in a couple of seconds. And then after that, the third step is to decide which stakeholders you should engage with and how. So here we go back to the diagram, and I'm going to show you how to decide on where to place your stakeholder into the diagram. So first of all, think about whether your person or stakeholder would be supporting or opposing the project. So if they are opposing the project, it means that they wouldn't necessarily agree with the kind of work that you're doing or do not necessarily agree with what you're trying to achieve. So if they're opposing the project, you would place them in the top row of the diagram, so either in box A or box B. Secondly, you need to consider whether the stakeholder has high or low influence over your project outcomes. If they have high influence, it means that they can really decide and influence the change that you want to achieve. And stakeholders with high influence you place on the right-hand side of the table, so in box B or box D. So if we now take an example, for example, religious leaders, they might oppose your project as they see child marriage as not being an issue, or they actually are the ones that are carrying out child marriages. And they also have very high influence, as many people listen to their opinion. So in this example, we would place religious leaders in box B on the right top side of the table. And you can see some examples of other stakeholders as well. So the next step is that you need to decide how the stakeholders that are placed in the table, how you're going to engage them and which ones you should engage them. And it's likely that the ones that you should engage with are the ones that have the greatest impact on your project results. And these will often be the stakeholders that you have placed in box B and box D of the table, as these are the ones with the highest influence over the project outcome. So, and within those with the highest influence, you have those who oppose and those who support your project. So the stakeholders that you've placed in box D are the ones that support you and that you need to keep informed and involved in as many aspects of the project as you can. The stakeholders you've placed in box B are the ones that oppose your project, and you will need to engage them closely and actively influence them to decrease their levels of opposition to the project. For more detailed guidance on how to do the stakeholder analysis and to go through it again step by step, please visit the toolkit. So we now go through the third step in your situation analysis, which is what we call a problem and solution analysis, and this is the final step in your analysis. You are now ready to identify the main problems your project will address, along with the causes and consequences of those problems, and then turn those into solutions and strategies that your project will address. This is a very exciting and useful step in designing your project, as it will help you to generate your project plan, including your objectives and your activities. One of the tools that we use in a problem analysis is what we call a problem tree.
So we're going to do a quick poll again. Have you ever worked with a problem tree? If you could answer yes or no, that would be great. We're just giving a little while so that everyone can answer. It seems like a lot of you have, but we're very excited that some of you haven't been working with this. So now we'll walk through step by step on how you can develop a project tree.
So we're going to run through the steps on how to design a problem tree. So a problem tree helps you to understand the causes and effects of a problem you have identified. And it will also help you to identify possible solutions. Excuse me, I think you're not seeing the screen, so I'm just going to share my screen again. Good, so you didn't see this before, so let me just start again. So a problem tree provides you with an overview of all the causes and effects of a problem you have identified and helps you to understand the causes and effects of that problem and the possible solutions that your project needs to focus on. So we're now going through the different steps that you need to do to complete a problem tree easily. It's important that when you do a problem tree analysis, you use all the information that you've gathered during your situation analysis. So everything you've heard from people during your focus group discussions, during your interviews, but also your stakeholder analysis and any other data that you collected will come in really handy here. So the first step in designing a problem tree is to identify the core problem. So when you were doing your situation analysis, you have heard a lot about the problems that are existing in your community. So it's important you pick one of those, or you try to decide one of the problems that you want to address. For example, the fact that many girls in the ages between 14 and 16 are dropping out of school, or maybe the high rate of child marriage among girls in your project area. So you write the core problem and stick them on the center of the tree. The next step is to identify the root causes of that problem. And these are the ones that we will write at the roots of the tree, so at the bottom. So again, using the information that you gathered during your situation analysis, think about what are some of the root causes, or what are some of the things that lead to the core problem you've just written down. So to help you think through some causes, you can think about traditional and cultural norms, poverty, gender inequality, or for example, lack of legislation to protect girls. Or maybe the government isn't committed to address child marriage, and that is really leading to the core problem you just described. So write down all the core problems you have heard in your situation analysis and stick them or write them directly on the roots section of the tree. And then the third step is to identify the effects of your problem. And these are what we call the branches, or the top of the tree. Again, you've heard many effects during your situation analysis. And the key here is to, again, write all of these down and stick them to the branches. So some examples of effects of your core problem might be that girls who are affected by child marriage are denied an education and are not going to school, or that girls in the project area suffer complications during pregnancy and childbirth. Or maybe you've heard that girls who are married before 18 are more likely to experience physical, sexual, and psychological violence. So here is an example of a completed problem tree, and these are just examples. As you can see, the core problem is in the middle of the tree, whereas the root causes are written down at the bottom and the effects at the top. And for more guidance on these steps, please go to the toolkit, as there is a very detailed step-by-step guidance in the toolkit. So the next step is to turn your problem tree into a solutions tree. Because we have now identified all the problems, we need to think about what are the possible solutions, as these will be the issues that your project needs to address. So a solution tree is developed by reversing negative statements of your problem tree into positive ones. And this way, a problem becomes a result. So for example, if your problem was that there is a lack of knowledge, your solution is that there is an increased knowledge. So I'm going to show you how to do this exactly. So you've seen the branches of the tree were called the negative effects. And by turning them into positive statements, these become the positive end results of your project. And the problem that you wrote down at the center of the tree becomes your core solution. And the causes that you wrote down at the roots of the tree become your strategies and results. So the key here really is to change the language from a negative statement into a positive one. For example, if you had written down that married girls depend on their husbands for an income, in your solutions tree, that becomes married girls have the skills to earn a living. Or when you wrote down girls are married as children, in your solutions tree, that become girls who are free to decide if, when, and who to marry. So here you can see an example of a solutions tree. And again, more detailed guidance on this can be found in the project toolkit, as well as some worksheets that you can use in your work as well. So we have now finished your situation analysis, and by now, at the end of this stage, you have a better understanding of the situation of child marriage in your project area, the key stakeholders that you should work with, the main issues facing girls and youth affected by child marriage, and the main problem your project needs to address, along with its causes and effects. So the next step is to really design your project. And we're going to run through a step-by-step process, which is also described in the toolkit. So when you apply for funding, nearly all donors require you to either provide a log frame or a theory of change to outline what the project aims to do. And a log frame provides a donor with a snapshot view of your project, and it's an extremely important document to get right. It's one of the first things a donor will look at when assessing your project proposal, and they may not consider your project for funding if you do not have one. So we're now going to run through some of the steps you need to complete to design a log frame. But before we do that, we're going to have another poll.
Great, thank you. We're now going to see who has ever worked with a log frame before. If you could answer like before on yes or no, that would be great. Great, it looks like we have a lot of people who know about log frames, so we hope that this will be a refresher just to run through more detail about how it works.
Great. So I'm going to run this quite quickly, as most of you know about log frames already. If you want to know more details about what you need to do, please go to the project design toolkit, as it has a lot of detailed guidance. So log frames are, as you all know, a way of presenting the details of your project in a logical format. So it summarizes what your project is going to achieve, what activities you will be doing to achieve some outputs and outcomes, what the progress and success of the project, how it will be measured and verified, and what the potential problems are that could affect the project. So this is a log frame template. As I said, it always looks the same, and it's always in the same format. And you can find a template of a log frame in the toolkit as well. So we're now going to run to some of the steps that you need to put to complete those boxes that you can see. But as you saw in that template as well, log frames always have a lot of technical terms and jargon. So this is just to explain again, and for some of you this might be just a refresher, what these different terms mean. So when we talk about the outcome, this is what your project is trying to achieve ultimately. So it's the one thing that your project wants to change. But the things that need to happen in order for that change to be achieved is what we call the outputs. So these are direct results of your project. And what you need to do to produce these outputs is what we call the activities. And then of course there's always a change that you only contribute to, which is the longer term change or the impact that we call. So let's get started on how to design a log frame. So first of all, again, you don't have to start from scratch. Actually, all the steps you've just completed, including the solutions tree, will help you to design your log frame. And especially the solutions tree, as you can easily transfer the content of your solutions tree into the log frame template in the following way. So in the solutions tree, you've come up with a core solution, and this can become the project outcome. You've also written down strategies and results. These were at the bottom of the tree or at the roots, and these become your project outputs. And you have described positive end results, or what you wrote down at the branches, and these can become project goals. So let me show you how that looks like. So like I said, your positive end results can become your goal. Your core solution can become your outcome, and your strategies and results can become your output. But once you've done that, it's important to refine what you have written down. So make sure that you review your goal, and that your goal really describes the higher change that you want to achieve. And it's important to realize that that change is not something that you can achieve solely by the project. So it's often a sentence that starts with to contribute to, towards, or to it describes what you will contribute to in the long term. For example, contribute towards the achievement of a national policy for ending child marriage. Secondly, you also need to review your outcomes. So these are the changes that will occur if the project is successful, and these are the main purposes of your project. So an example of an outcome could be a reduction of 20% in the occurrence of child marriage in the project area by the end of the project period. And then you need to review your outputs. So are these really describing the specific results of your project activities? And are they things that you can directly control or manage within the project? So an example of an output can be girls have an increased knowledge about the negative effects of child marriage, as well as knowledge and skills to claim their sexual reproductive health and rights. So this would be an output of an activity that you have done around awareness raising and education. And when you refine your project outcomes and outputs, be sure that these are SMART. And I think most of you have heard of this before. So SMART means that they are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And if you want to know more about this, please visit the toolkit, as more is explained about what SMART is and how you can make sure your goals and outputs are SMART. So the third step in completing your log frame is to describe your activities. So your activity section of the log frame describes the actual tasks or actions that you will do in the project to produce the outputs that you want to see. And you always have to make sure that you have at least one activity per output, as you cannot achieve something without inputting into it as well. So each output should have at least one activity. So once you have done this, it is essential that you review your activities to ensure that your project designs involves working with a range of stakeholders. And more on this you can find in the project design toolkit. But remember that during your situation analysis and also during the start of this webinar, we discussed that child marriage is a cross-cutting issue, and we need to involve a wide range of people to address child marriage effectively. So if you want to know more about how you can involve other actors, please visit the toolkit. So the last step in finalizing your log frame is to decide on the indicators, the means of verification and assumptions. So indicators, it is important to think about what is it that I need to measure, or what is the change that I can measure achievements against. So these are what we call the indicators. But also how can these outcomes and outputs be measured, or what we call the means of verification. And also, are we making any assumptions? And these assumptions you need to include into your log frame as well. And a lot more guidance on these three steps you can find in the toolkit, and I really encourage you to have a read of that. But also there's resources that you can use in this phase of your project design. For example, Girls Not Brides developed a list of recommended indicators for child marriage projects, which you can find on the Resource Center. And this can really help you to think through your indicators, and you can adapt some of the ones from the list that you can find online. So you have now completed the log frame, and we've just gone very briefly through the different steps. But in the toolkit you can find more detailed guidance, and also you can find an example of a completed log frame on child marriage that you can use.
Right, you're now almost done with designing your project. However, before you finish, there's still a couple more things that you need to think about. Other steps or activities that you need to do include creating a work plan, which helps you work out what you will do and when, creating a monitoring and evaluation plan. This helps you to establish how you will check on your progress and success and how you tweak it along the way. Develop a budget. This is also important so you can work out how much your project will cost. Develop a sustainability plan, which helps you to ensure that your results last longer than once your project is over. And lastly, create a risk assessment, which looks at what could possibly go wrong and how you can prevent those from happening. Again, more guidance on each of these steps can be found in the toolkit, and we strongly recommend that you go through each step for your project.
So I think we've come to the end of our presentation, and we would now give some time to answer some of the questions. And I think some of you have already been writing some questions in the question box. If you have another question, please write it as well. I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer all of them, but we're going to try our best. So the first question that I saw is around youth advocates and how is Girls Not Brides planning to strengthen the work of youth advocates? So that's a really good question, and it's something that we haven't touched on in this toolkit or in this webinar. But we know that young advocates are very important to achieve our vision of ending child marriage. And in terms of strengthening our engagement with youth advocates, I can tell you that we are currently establishing a Facebook group, which will be an interactive space of our passionate youth advocates and ambassadors to share their work on child marriage and to exchange learning with each other. So this Facebook group will be launched in the coming months, and all the youth advocates that are currently part of the Google group will receive an automatic invitation for that. But also, as many of you know, there is a global meeting that Girls Not Brides organizes next year, and in the run-up to that global meeting, we will be reaching out to young advocates and work closely with them, as we know that it's very important that this group is involved in the planning of that meeting, and we want to make sure that this group, who are the future of our global partnership, are key to addressing the main issues. So I hope that answers your question. So a second question that one of you asked is around communications with donors. So how can you build or improve your communication with donors? And that is a very relevant question as well. So in the second part of the toolkit, we give you some concrete guidance of this, and we will cover more detailed guidance on that in the second webinar, which will take place next week Friday on the 22nd of September at the same time. So the next webinar will really focus on fundraising specifically. So now that you have designed your project, how can we turn that into a successful funding proposal, but also how do you build up relationships with donors, how can you find out which donors are funding child marriage projects, and how can you communicate with donors. So please attend the webinar next week to learn more about that, but also download the toolkit and specifically look at section 2 or part 2 of the toolkit on this. A third question, how can child marriage link with SRHR projects? And that's a very good question as well. We know that a lot of the Girls Not Brides members are addressing other issues than child marriage as well. And issues around health or sexual reproductive health and rights is something that a lot of you are working on. So recently, Girls Not Brides developed a series of briefs that looks at how to integrate child marriage into other sectors. And one of those briefs is around health and SRHR specifically as well. And you can find the brief on our resource center, but there's also a link to it in the toolkit. So please have a read of that, and it has some concrete examples of how in your own SRHR project you can add certain activities or you can think around certain issues to also address child marriage. So a fourth question, is around monitoring and evaluation. I've always had problems with monitoring and evaluation. Can you run us through it again? So again, I don't think we have time now in this webinar to run through it again, but we will be sending the recording of this webinar. And also the toolkit has a more detailed section on monitoring and evaluation, including how you can develop your M&E plan, how you decide on indicators, how you decide on targets, and how you decide on your means of verification or the kinds of information that you need to collect. So I really want to refer you to the toolkit and also to the indicators list that I just mentioned, and all of this again you can find on the resource center. And the toolkit you can also find on the funding page on the Girls Not Brides website. And I think there's another question coming in. I think that was the last question. So again, if you, after this webinar is closed, and if you have any questions, please always feel free to follow up with us directly. We will be sending the recording of this webinar, so you can also share with your colleagues or with other people who are interested. I've seen that a lot of you have learned new tools and have found this webinar very useful, which I'm very glad to hear. So the next webinar will take place next week, Friday, on the 22nd of September at the same time. So this is 11 a.m. London time, 1 p.m. Nairobi time, and 3:30 p.m. Delhi time. So in this next webinar, we will talk about how to turn your project proposal into your project design into a strong proposal. So this will really look into what are the extra things that you need to do to develop your proposal and make it successful. We will also discuss how to identify potential donors for your projects and give you tips to apply for funding opportunities. And like I said earlier, learn more about how to build strong relations with donors, including communications. Before we close, I just wanted to let you know that you can find the toolkits on our Girls Not Brides website. If you go to the website and then go to resources and then fundraising, you will find a direct link. But we will also include a link to the toolkit in a follow-up email that all of you will receive after this webinar. So, thank you all very much for listening. Please join us again on Friday the 22nd of September. If you haven't registered for this webinar yet, please do. We will share with you the link for registration in the follow-up email that you will be sent tomorrow after this webinar. Again, thank you very much. If you would like to give us any feedback or if you have any unanswered questions, please feel free to email us at info@girlsnotbrides.org. And if you really like the webinar and you want to encourage your colleagues and your fellow activists to also start engaging with Girls Not Brides, please feel free to tweet about it, to post to Facebook, or to also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. So that's it for today. I'm going to close the session now, and thank you all so much for listening and for making time to learn more about project design and child marriage. And we look forward to having you again online next week, Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.